Hello, Soundies. Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Today is the 16th of February, 2025. It's great to have you here and hope you're all doing well. Thanks for the weather reports and thanks for joining us today. Let's head over to our agenda. As always, this is a workshop which goes along with our courses over at school.learnlightandsound.com. And today we're going to do two main things, as well as kind of just chat and enjoy the community here. First, we're going to do some ear training, but we're going to push the lever up just a little bit more. So slightly more advanced, we're going to add some additional effects, and you're going to use your ears with your best headphones to identify what they are. We also did have a question that was submitted ahead of time that we'll get to in just a little bit. It has to do with mixing a multi-person podcast. I have a course I was going to say, of course, I have a course on mixing in Fairlight, which goes over this. This person was actually asking from the perspective of Adobe Audition, which unfortunately I don't have a license for Audition anymore here. For my day job I do, but for here we don't. But I can talk through the general concepts, and we'll do a little run through on that as well. All right. Everybody doing well out there? Looks like we got a few more joining here. Audio Buff, good to hear from you today. Looks like Matt Ruff, the troublemaker, is here in town. We've got What Is Your Method from North Vancouver. Thanks for joining us, Mike. Good to have you here as well. Keith is here, and Robert in the chat so far. So great. Let's go ahead and let me just play an audio clip here. I'm not going to show you just yet because I want you to focus on your ears here and listening to this. This is an audio clip that I used to demonstrate EQ matching last week on the main channel. This is what it sounds like. Let me just make sure that all the effects are turned off. That looks good. And that looks good. Okay, this is what it sounds like when there is no processing on the audio track. Here's a recording where I'm doing with both the Sennheiser MKH50 boomed above in a pretty typical booming position, and also recording the DPA 4160 lavalier microphone at the same time. And what I want to demonstrate here is how to EQ match these. So here's a little quote from Sherlock Holmes. "It is an old maxim of mine that when you've excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." Okay, so that's where we're starting from. Let's go back out to our main camera here. I'm going to go ahead and apply an effect here. As usual, when the effect is off, I will hold up my hand in a 0. When it's on, I'll hold it up my finger as to indicate 1 that it's on. So off and on. Listen with your best headphones. If you're on like phone speakers, it may be a little tricky here, but let's go ahead and start there. And in this case, I just want you to consider and evaluate: is there EQ applied? Is there compression applied? Or, and I'm only going to do one of them, or is there an expander / gate applied? So here's the first one. Let me just get this set up. Okay, here we go. Here's a recording where I'm doing with both the Sennheiser MKH50 boomed above in a pretty typical booming position, and also recording the DPA 4160 lavalier microphone at the same time. And what I want to demonstrate here is how to EQ match these. So here's a little quote from Sherlock Holmes. "It is an old maxim of mine that when you've excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." Here's a recording where I'm doing with both the Sennheiser MKH50 boomed above in a pretty typical booming position, and also recording the DPA 4160 lavalier microphone at the same time. And what I want to demonstrate here is how to EQ match these. So here's a little quote from Sherlock Holmes. "It is an old maxim of mine that when you've excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." Okay, friends, fellow soundies, go ahead and put your guess in the chat. Again, was it EQ? Was it a compressor or was it an expander that you heard in that case? All right. Rag and Bone Puppet Theater says compression. Okay, Mike says compression. Mark Holloway says Curtis. Compression. All right. Very good. All right. Let's get a few more. Let a few more trickle in here. So this one is a little trickier and requires, just some careful listening and a little bit of training. EQ low boosted from Hampton. Very good. Okay. All right. Let's go to the Mac. Let me show you what we did here. Here we are. So we are in DaVinci Resolve Fairlight. I have the Dynamics processor turned up here, and it was actually an expander. Now, I realized something. So my mistake. I left some makeup gain turned on, so it probably did sound different. It sounded louder, certainly. But I left that at 3, both when the expander was on and off. So what's the expander doing? In between phrases, the expander is reducing the noise floor. It's pushing down the audio in between phrases. So we have our threshold set at -45 here. So as soon as the audio falls below -45, it decreases its overall loudness by up to 12 dB. And it's using a 2-to-1 ratio here. So that is what we were listening to here. So let's just go ahead and listen to that again. And listen especially between phrases here to hear, to see what happens with the audio. So here we go. Here's a recording where I'm doing with, that I'm doing with both the Sennheiser MKH50 boomed above in a pretty typical booming position, and also recording the DPA 4160 lavalier microphone at the same time. And what I want to demonstrate here is how to EQ match these. So here's a little quote from Sherlock Holmes. "It is an old maxim of mine that when you've excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." Okay, did you notice that little gain reduction meter here, right here? In between phrases, it was pushing away substantially down, so reducing the overall level by about 12 dB. So that was a tricky one. I realized that. So let's go ahead and switch back to the main camera. These are the kind of things that you can start to notice. Louder, you were clipping like crazy. Did it sound distorted to you? Let's see here. It was louder. We did have the makeup gain on 3 dB. The track here, let's just see where the track is sitting. Let's go back to the Mac here. Track was at -26, and we boosted it by 3 dB, so it should have been sitting around -23. Shouldn't be clipping on this end. I don't know if anyone else is experiencing clipping. Could you let us know in the chat? Everything seems to be okay here on this end. Just want to confirm. Okay, cool. Let's go back to the main screen here then. Main camera, and I will apply something else this time. Danny's chortling over here. So I listen to you, but I'm watching the Daytona 500, so I'm only half here.
I'm definitely not going to hear clipping.
You're not going to hear clipping. Rag and Bone did not hear clipping on their end. Okay. All right. No clipping for what is your method, and it sounded a little crispy. So this is, Linda, this is unprocessed audio aside from the expander that we just applied, so haven't done any cleanup of the mouth noises or any of that business. Okay, let's go back to our main camera here. All right, let's do our next one. Here we go. Let me just dial a little something in here. Okay, now you tell me what you're hearing this time. Here's a recording where I'm doing with that I'm doing with both the Sennheiser MKH50 boomed above in a pretty typical booming position, and also recording the DPA 4160 lavalier microphone at the same time. And what I want to demonstrate here is how to EQ match these. So here's a little quote from Sherlock Holmes. "It is an old maxim of mine that when you've excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." Okay, let's get our guesses in here. Was it EQ? Was it compression? Was it an expander? Let me know in the chat here. Good way to train your ears to listen here carefully. This one, I think, was a little probably easier to identify. So we'll give folks just a moment here. I had an interesting experience I can tell you about over the week. I was at a conference over the week in a big hotel ballroom, and we sat down for the presentation. And when I walked in, I noticed that the tech booth was not at the back in the center, and I didn't even see it. I was like, where are they? There was a DJ up near the stage who was playing some music, and we sat down, and it was ear-splittingly loud. So my team and I got up. I got just out of the way of the speakers so I could protect my hearing a little bit. Greamer, one of my colleagues, walked up to the DJ and said, "Hey, it is really, really loud." And the DJ said, "Not me. It's the mixer's back in the back corner." This was an enormous ballroom. This was probably enough to accommodate, well, we had 600 people there. So, and there was still some room on the side, so it was probably big enough to accommodate probably closer to 800. But the interesting thing is the way they configured it, they put the entire tech booth, including the sound mixer, all the way off to one side in the corner. And so when I walked over there and I was like, "Hey, it's really super loud over here. Can you pull the levels down just a little bit?" And when I was standing there, I realized they can't hear anything close to what it was like to be in the audience there, which was really kind of a weird thing. Anyway, let's go to the chat and see what we've got. Linda says it's an EQ. Okay, EQ, I think. Good. I hear the change, but can't say what. Okay. EQ, low cut from Hampton. Low cut, bottom of the voice, 200 hertz, question mark. Thank you, Robert. Okay, let's go to the Mac, and I will show you exactly what it was. It was a 6 dB cut at 107 hertz. So definitely a low cut that removed some of the lower frequencies. If you listen again, let's go back and forth again. I'll turn it off.
Oh, wait, sorry.
Oh, Danny's going to take us back to the Mac. When it's on, it looks like this. When it's off, it looks like that. Okay, here we go. On. Here's a recording where I'm doing with both the Sennheiser MKH50 boomed above in a pretty typical booming position, and also recording the DPA 4160 lavalier microphone at the same time. And what I want to demonstrate here is how to EQ match these. So here's a little quote from Sherlock Holmes. "It is an old maxim of mine that when you've excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." Here. Okay, hopefully you can hear that now. So that's about a 6 dB cut at 100, little over 100 hertz. Definitely heard some of the kind of the low frequency disappear once I turned that on. Matt Ruff says, "Hotel sound, I have plenty of horror stories." It was, I have to grant the team that was there doing it, they had a tough job. This particular ballroom was oriented so it was very long, very wide, but not as deep. So from the stage to the back of the ballroom was not nearly as large as from side to side. I still would have put at least the mixer. Instead, they had the primary camera sitting right in the center at the back. I would have found a way to put the mixer there so they could at least hear what the audience was hearing. I felt sorry for the fellow because it was like, it's an impossible job. Like, how do you mix if you can't really hear what everyone else is hearing? So in any case, hopefully you heard the EQ that we just applied here. So let's go ahead and disable that. And let's do our next one here. We have a question. The question from Robert: why a band cut filter, not a low cut? The low cut would be around 180 to 200 hertz. It's just what I happen to do. You can, of course, normally when I'm processing the audio, if I was going to be down there around 100, I'd probably be doing a low cut as opposed to a band filter. So it's a good question. It's just an exercise. All right, let's do another one. Let me get this set up over here. And let's have a listen. Here we go. Here's a recording where I'm doing with both the Sennheiser MKH50 boomed above in a pretty typical booming position, and also recording the DPA 4160 lavalier microphone at the same time. And what I want to demonstrate here is how to EQ match these. So here's a little quote from Sherlock Holmes. "It is an old maxim of mine that when you've excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." Here's a recording where I'm doing with both the Sennheiser MKH50 boomed above in a pretty typical booming position, and also recording the DPA 4160 lavalier microphone at the same time. And what I want to demonstrate here is how to EQ match these. So here's a little quote from Sherlock Holmes. "It is an old maxim of mine that when you've excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." Here's a recording. Okay, go ahead and put your guess in, your answer in the chat here. And let's see what we get here. So to finish that story, yeah, as far as the ballroom, I probably would have found a way to put at least the sound mixer if the rest of the tech crew needed to be off in the corner because they had more room there, which they did. It seems like the lighting people and the playback, because they played back some videos in between, and the presentation, all those tech, support staff were back there. That actually, they pulled their job off very nicely in the corner there. But the sound mixer was operating at a massive disadvantage, being way back in the corner there, and just wasn't aware that he was pushing levels that were dangerous. I measured with my phone, which is not the perfect SPL meter, sound pressure level meter, but it was well up into the 90s, and there were going to be presentations most of the day. That's very dangerous for people's ears. So anyway, let's see what we got in the chat. This is from before. Curtis, your live stream sound is clean, but the recording is clipped. Okay. It's not technically clipping on this end, but possibly there's something in the chain a little later on that's doing that. I'll take a listen to it after here. All right, let me know what you heard in that last sample. Excited to hear what you're hearing on your end. Was it EQ? Was it compression? Was it a gate or an expander? Incidentally, a compressor and a limiter are basically the same thing, but the limiter just has a much more extreme compression ratio. It's just much more, it moves things down again. Rag and Bone says, I'll guess compression again. Okay. And then likewise, an expander and gate are basically the same thing, except that a gate is more extreme. So a gate will actually essentially turn off the audio once it engages, whereas an expander will just reduce the audio some set amount that you specify. Okay, we got a guess. We have one answer for compression. Any others out there? People.
Here's an aside.
Here's an aside. This week we will provide AVL in a room the size of a football field. The sound will be plus or minus 3 dB for every seat in the house, industry standard for uniform coverage. Now that is what I'm talking about. I wish Audio Buff had been out to mix our conference. And I don't know, Audio Buff, what do you do if you show up and they say, hey, you need to go over in the corner here? What do you tell them? Maybe there's a way to pull that off, but you have to do a lot of testing and calibration ahead of time. All right, well, let's go over to the Mac and I'll show you what we had here. Here we go. Okay. We had a compressor on this time. So we were compressing, and you could hear that the bass sounded a little bit more prominent when we were doing that. That's often the case with a single band compressor. So we had our threshold set down at minus 21, ratio 3:1. We had a soft knee on there, so it actually started compressing before it got to minus 21. and we had our attack set to 1.4 milliseconds. The reason I do that for dialogue is I want the consonants to make their way through a little bit. If you go even faster than that, then the problem is that the consonants won't sound as clear. So it kind of takes away from the clarity of the voice a little bit. And then the release was set to 170 milliseconds. So let me just, while we're here on the Mac, let me go ahead and just play some of this for you so you can kind of attune your ears. This is what you're listening for with compression. Here's a recording where I'm doing with both the Sennheiser MKH50 boomed above in a pretty typical booming position, and also recording the DPA 4160 lavalier microphone at the same time. And what I want to demonstrate here is how to EQ match these. So here's a little quote from Sherlock Holmes. "It is an old maxim of mine that when you've excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." Okay, hopefully you're able to attune your ears to that just a little bit. I backed it off at the end there, but that was pretty substantial dialogue compression there. So there was definitely a difference. I hope you heard that. And that's, again, an opportunity for you to hear it a little bit more so you can kind of get used to what that sounds like. So, all right, that's our ear training. If we have more time, we can come back and do some more. But I wanted to answer a question. So let's go to our agenda here. A couple weeks ago, I got this question here. For a multi-guests podcast, how would you approach loudness, normalize, compression, and leveling? I know the final mix needs to be compressed and normalized. For example, after cleaning each track, would you compress and normalize each track before making any edits, such as cutting and mixing? So a lot of questions here, and a lot of good questions. Let me just run through some things quickly over here, just as a demonstration. Let me first say this. So this is not something that is easy to answer in even an hour. There's a lot here. In fact, we have an entire course that's based in DaVinci Resolve Fairlight for how to do this. So we have two people kind of doing an interview. We add sound design elements. We add music to the intro and outro like you typically would in a podcast. And we show exactly how I would go about mixing that and also mastering it at the end, or essentially loudness normalizing it. So it's more than can be answered here. I also don't have an Adobe Audition. I know my Ford Noel is using Adobe Audition just as context here. But let's switch on over to the Mac again, and let me just pull up a project here. So I'm going to go ahead and close this one, and instead we will pull up this one here. So I have two tracks, and let's just do a Shift Z to get them all on the screen here. This is what it looks like. And if we pull this second one down, you can see there's probably a pretty substantial difference. So let me just kind of walk through some of the things that I would do at a high level. I'm not going to get into all the nitty gritty, but just to kind of see some things. So this is like a 5.5, almost maybe approaching 6-minute interview here. And there are a few things going on. So if I look at the audio here and I just look at the loudness overall, this is Emma's track. She's sitting at minus 26 LUFS. And then mine right here, this is me. I can look at my levels. Mine are sitting at minus 33.1. So here would be a good opportunity to first get them in the same ballpark. And this is where loudness units full scale can be really, really helpful. So I just want to kind of get them to that same minus 26. And so I would probably come in here and boost mine some. But to boost mine, you noticed when we analyze those audio levels, the problem is I'm sitting at minus 33, but I've only got 3.5 dB of headroom. I only have 3.5 dB that I can boost it before I start clipping. And not only that, but you want to leave some additional headroom too on top of that. So this is not a great situation. So I probably need to address that very first. Now, there are a number of ways to do that. Honestly, for me, I always find it easiest. Maybe it's just how my brain works, I'm not sure. But if I go to RX, I always find this to be an easier job. And there are a few things that I would do. First, I'll pull up my loudness control and just make sure it matches here. So yeah, it's saying minus 33 as well. It's also saying 3.4 dB of headroom. That's to be expected. Now, Actually, let me take a pause here. Let's go back to the main camera for just a minute. Before I dive into this and start kind of digging into the details of what I would do here, let me just talk at a very high level for how I would approach this. Whether you mix your audio or normalize it before or after video editing is a decision you have to make for your own workflow. It's not, I will say this, traditionally for film, all of the audio mix is done, in theory at least, after the video edit is complete. So there aren't going to be any more edits in terms of cutting out things that don't belong there, blah, 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 that kind of thing. Same thing for a podcast. Especially if you're working on a longer podcast, to me, this approach makes sense where you edit things first and then you do the audio mix afterwards. On my YouTube videos, I actually do the inverse. Because it's just me talking, and I just sit down in front of the camera and I have my notes in front of me and I record the entire thing. For me, I'm only having to basically process one clip. So for me, I actually do that first, then I bring that into the video editing app, and then I do my edits from there. And then I'll do little things to touch up the audio. So if I make a cut, I will do crossfades or things like that just to make sure it doesn't sound really weird or unusual. And then I have my audio, I have intro and outro audio, and that's already normalized. That's been normalized beforehand. So I can just kind of mix that in, just adjust the levels there to match the dialogue wherever we're at. So to answer your question, my Ford Noel, I would actually decide on which of those workflows you're going to do. If you're doing a multi-guest podcast and it's a longer form podcast, at least 20 minutes or longer, I would probably do the edits first and then the mix afterwards. Second, I would approach it to clean things up. And well, first I would get the audio levels of the different people at roughly the same level. They just need to sound right. So you can adjust your volume in whatever you're mixing with. That's okay. Don't worry about loudness at this stage. At this stage, you're worried more about making them sound together, so that people aren't going to have, your audience isn't going to have to drop the volume for you and increase the volume to hear your guest. You want to solve that problem. Now, that can be done a variety of ways. You can do loudness normalization by just using a loudness control plugin or something like that in DaVinci Resolve. Fairlight, there is a loudness meter. You set your target for the overall thing, and then you can play it back and it will tell you where you're sitting. You can use that. And then there are a variety of tools you can use to, if you do find, for example, you have to boost the levels like we're going to have to do here with my track, there are a variety of tools you can use. You can use a leveler. That is absolutely a valid way to do that and just kind of level things out, because if you're in this situation that I'm in, let's go back to the Mac now. If you're in this situation here, I've got a problem. Like I can't get even to minus 26 because I don't have enough headroom to boost things up, and I've got these transients sticking way out. So I can do this a variety of ways. Now the trick is I don't want to necessarily do a leveler here, because the problem is if I do a leveler, it's going to take all of Emma's dialogue, which is microphone bleed basically, and it's going to try to boost all that up. So I'm not going to want to use a leveler at this point. Just a kind of a practical problem if I did use a leveler. So what I'm probably going to do here is a couple things. I noticed, first of all, that some of these waveforms are a little bit asymmetric. In other words, they're sticking up more on the positive side than on the negative side. Like this one's coming in at something like minus 6. And on the negative side of that same waveform, it's at like minus 11, 12, something like that. So it's substantially different. So I actually have this adaptive phase rotator that I can use, and you'll watch here. So watch what happens to the loudness control. We currently have minus 3.4 dB of true peak headroom. Let's see what happens after we run it. It is now at minus 5.5. So I was able to gain basically 2 additional dB of headroom. So that's helpful. That's one thing I could do. Another tool I might use is I might just come in here, to be honest, and I might just manually manage some of this. So let's listen to this bit here.
Great. With that, why don't you start us off?
So with that, way too loud here. I'm going to take the that and let's just pull the gain down. Rule of thumb for me, minus 3 dB generally will sound fairly transparent. More than that will start to sound a little weird. This is what it sounds like now.
Great. With that, why don't you start us off?
See, it mellowed out that a little bit. That's good. But we've got some other transients sticking way out. This one's a biggie. Let's see what this one's all about. Let's play that back.
Okay.
I think he likes it too.
It's a laugh. Laughs are the tricky bits. They often stick way out. And this is where Emma and I are both overlapping, so we have to be kind of careful here. Let's just make sure we just captured my laugh. Well, there's a little bit of Emma in there as well. Let's see if I can get just me. Oh, sorry. Let's just get that. Let's go bring that down by 3 dB. See what happens.
Okay.
I think he likes it too.
I think that'll work. That'll work for us. So we're just managing these transients. Here's another big one over here. Let's move over just a bit. There we go.
Well, everybody, thank you so much.
The well in well, everybody.
Well.
Okay, let's pull that down, 3 dB.
Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us for today's podcast.
Okay, and you can see our true peak is now at minus 7.3. So we're getting closer to a point where we can actually boost this up to get to that minus 26 range. Let's just go take a look at some of these others here.
That time in the world.
So I just put a lot of emphasis on that in that time. Another biggie over here. My crutch word there. First. Oh, wait. I wanted the gain. Reduce the gain. Okay. Sounds like this now.
How about you?
First, for film.
Okay. Manage that. You get the point. I could go through all of the details here and do that over and over again, but that's the first step I would take here. I still don't quite have enough to get to minus 26 without, and still leave some headroom. I'd like to leave at least 1.5 dB of headroom. So I might have to do just a touch of compression as well. Let's just take a look at these last few here and see. That one's also at minus 7.6.
I had.
Okay.
I had an audiobook that I put together.
Okay. See what this is all about.
First, very exciting. It was the first time that I got to ever play with a really nice.
Now that's a case where that actually wasn't transparent. I could very clearly hear that I had dropped that down, so you have to be careful about those as well. All right, we're at 8 right now, so I need basically 7 dB. We're getting close. I might just run a little bit of compression on here just to kind of manage the last of those transients here. So I'm going to pull up my plugin. Let's go get a compressor. In this case, we can just use the Nectar 4 compressor. That'll do the job for us. And I just want to kind of just manage these a little bit. So I'm using the top of my window here. That's minus 11. We'll set our threshold right there. Only want to touch those. Good. Our ratio, we can take that to 3:1 roughly. Milliseconds, I'm going to say 1.5. Our release, I like to usually be just a little over 100. I'm not going to do any makeup game, and it's set to peak mode. So, all right, let's just see what this does here. I'm going to play through this part here and just watch what the compressor is actually doing. On preview, here we go.
It was very exciting. It was the first time that I got to ever play with a really nice microphone and a really nice channel strip. So that really kind of kicked things off in a lot of ways for me.
Nice. How did you go from music to dialogue?
Well, for me, it was natural because I have a drum kit. I have an ukulele. I have a Bowron. I have is that everything? I think that's everything.
Yeah.
But I don't know that I'm really a musician.
Okay, I think that sounds pretty good. So go ahead and render that. And close that plugin. That gives us 9, so we're good. We can go ahead and boost it to minus 26. And that'll put us in a good spot where we still have some true peak headroom left. Give it just a moment here to process all that. We'll close our gain module. And here we go. Okay, there we are. So now we are at minus 26 and we have 2.3 dB of headroom. So I'm going to go ahead and file, choose save. When we hop back over here to DaVinci Resolve, let's just double check it, see what it says here. We're going to have to come into the media pool, it looks like. It still looks like that Resolve has that funky issue. Let's just go and come up here to Timeline and Layered Audio Editing, and let's go to the Timeline. Where is the show? I want to display the track layers is what I want to do. I don't know if they've changed this here. We've got layered audio editing. I don't want to flatten the layers. They've moved things around again, it looks like. Audio clip. To the view menu, it should be here. Show audio track layers, okay. It's funny because this audio track layer so weird. It should be right. Okay. Go back here. Again, right click. I guarantee you this is not minus 33. Let me look at those waveforms now. Let's play a little bit here where Emma's talking and then I'm talking.
I did not become an architect because of that, but it did foster a strong interest in design and aesthetic.
Okay, interesting. And
Yeah.
I think appreciating someone's work like Frank Lloyd.
Okay, so I think we're going to call that good. It's just funkiness on the part of Fairlight here. So what I would do next then, my Ford Noel, is if I don't know if you've already done this. Apologies if you've already done this. But the other thing I would do is what's called railroading. So when Emma's talking here and I'm not talking, this would be the time to go and cut those bits out. So like here, we don't need this part where she's talking and I'm not talking from her microphone, from her talking bleeding into my microphone. So that's this would be a whole thing where we would go through. So I'm talking here, so we really don't need her microphone here while I'm talking, so on and so forth. And of course, you'd want to add crossfades here, so something that just makes the transition between the two. And we could even add just a touch of that back and crossfade there, so on and so forth. So this is what's called railroading. So I don't know if you have time or you have interest in doing this with a podcast, this makes it a lot more work. But this is what they do in films typically, and that's why they sound so much cleaner, is because when person one is talking, their voice is not being picked up in person two's mic, and vice versa. So back and forth and back and forth. Now, let's go back to the main camera for just a moment here. This is where most people that are doing podcasts get overwhelmed. They're like, I'm not doing that. I don't have time to do that. Or they try it a couple times and they're like, oh, and then they give up on their podcast. Rather than do that, there are other tools you can use to do this railroading for you, to automate this to some extent. One is to use an auto mixer on your recorder if you've got one. Now, there are only a few out there, but they can be really, really helpful. The best one that I have used that's not at the totally high-end professional level is the Sound Devices MixPre. So you can add the Mix Assist plugin to that, and that essentially does is while you're recording, when person one's talking, it will keep their microphone up, but I'm not talking, it will reduce the level of my mic. And then as soon as I start talking, it'll do the inverse, back and forth, and it will make a mix for you so you don't have to do this in post. And I found the Sound Devices MixPre does a really good job at it. The Zoom F series of recorders, the F3, F6, and F8M Pro also do it. They do a nice job. There are probably some others out there. So that's one option if you want to save yourself a lot of post-production time. Other thing to consider, there are plugins that can help with this as well. The best known one that I'm familiar with is what's called WT Auto Mixer. So if you haven't heard of that before, I have a video over on my main channel. Go to YouTube, just type in Curtis Judd WT Auto Mixer. You'll see a video. We did a couple of them. We did a live stream a few years ago, probably 3 years ago, and we did a dedicated video more recently, I think in 2024. So you'll want to look at the 2024 version to get the best example of how that works. So those are things that you need to do, that you can do to simplify this process of railroading. Okay, let's break for questions, and I've got some more to cover. I'm not finished with that question yet, but Mark, could you run the entire clip through the leveler to pull down all the transients, then reproduce the track and continue to clean it up? You could, but the thing is that most levelers will also pull the low-level audio up as well, and that's the trick. So you generally want to avoid that. Unless you have a leveler where you can tell it only pull down transients. But I think most of them will do both. They're going to pull down transients and boost low-level audio to get it all closer. So that's the trick. Okay. Several parts from DaVinci Girl. It's nice you're here training, but it's always isolated. Film and video result on a balance with music, and here things almost change. This is the approach of the software we give you. You learn how to arrange music with dialogue together. This is part of stem and layer use. Here exists close to no training and skills. The film guys, most do not understand how to mix dialogue with music. What is the most interesting part, including sound design? Balanced sound with all topics means dialogue, sound effects, and also music in balance. That's the last bit?
Yeah.
Okay. That's fair. So we're not there yet. That's a fair point, but we're just trying to do very basic training of our ears right now. If you're focused on being a re-recording mixer, you're absolutely right. If we were training everyone in this community to be a re-recording mixer, yes. However, a lot of what we're doing here is production sound recording, so we're capturing the dialogue, in which case we need to be able to hear these things. And then also more simple mixes where, for example, like a podcast where you mainly have dialogue and maybe intro and outro music. So that's what we're focused on here. I understand what you're saying. I wouldn't say that what we're doing here is useless. I would say what we're doing here is more focused on particular roles versus re-recording mixer, who is doing the final mix for a film that has to mix all of the dialogue, sound effects, music. So yeah, it's a different game. The podcast I produce is a video podcast, so I do it all in Final Cut, and I use the multicam feature. And lucky for me, I designed the set, and so the audio is clean, and I can simply delete the non-talking track. That's another way to do it. Be in control. And design, manage both the production audio, but also the post. If you can do both of those, you can save yourself a lot of grief. And Matt, I'm with you. Whenever I can do both, I do, because then I know that what I get is going to be something I can work with. When I edit in Media Composer, my exported sequence sounds good, loudness-wise. When I play back with LMedia Video Player or VLC, I need to raise my volume controls. Any idea why? I would measure. So, Leo, I think you need to be measuring both within Media Composer and measuring the playback from VLC or LMedia video. I can show you something. Let's go back to the Mac. If I pull up Audio Hijack, this is one way to do it. There are other tools to do it, but Audio Hijack on Mac, we'll skip the update for now. I can actually pull in audio from another application. So in this case, I can pull from DaVinci Resolve, and I can run a loudness meter. So let's go ahead and play back some of the audio in Resolve, and this will allow me to measure its loudness. So this would be an approach I would suggest.
Is your first creative influence?
Well, I think first on my list, and actually also chronologically, would be Frank Lloyd Wright. So I've
The architect.
Yes, the
Okay.
architect, the famous American. So of course, like many people, I first became aware of Falling Water when I was, I don't know, 10 or so. And then I don't remember specifically looking at his work, but just in general architecture literature, there were some mentions of some of his other work as well, including one very interesting mid-century or earlier house in Chicago with lots of wood finish and Art Deco stained glass. So not like the old kind. Lots
Old
of
kind of stained glass. you
old
mean?
kind of stained glass. Yeah.
Got it, okay.
Not like a painting in glass, but like very geometric.
Go ahead and lead us off.
Okay, so Leo, that's how I'd approach that. I would make sure that you measure it just so that you can see what's happening. It's very likely that VLC or I don't know what that other one was called, but it's likely that those are doing something there. Maybe they're not using the same pan law, which can actually affect things as well. And I don't even know if they have pan law settings that you can adjust.
Okay, so you have more here.
I do, but let's keep with the chat here for the next few minutes. Danny, I just emailed Curtis 2 pics from last year's conference. You can use them if they are of any help for today's conversation.
I think that's about audio setup in a ballroom.
Yeah, don't cut to the Mac yet. Let me pull those up. Thank you, Audio Buff. This could be really helpful.
There's a comment I should put up here from that.
Okay.
So let me put up this comment.
Danny's going to put up a comment. If we are hired for a job, we have prerequisites. If I can't put speakers in the tech area in the proper locations, I'll pass on the job. Yeah, it's a great point. Let's cut over to the Mac here really quickly just so you can see an image that Audio Buff sent over. So here is the mixing board, and you can see center stage right here. So this is exactly where he needs to be sitting. And then the second one, I assume the mixing board is right here, again in line. I'm not 100% clear, but I think it's going to be right over here. So yeah, this is ideally where you want the mixing board. And not only that, but what I've seen too is when you're doing live sound, another thing, you can cut back to the main camera here, is that as a professional front of house mixer, you'll bring and I've seen Jude with this too, with Audio Buff with this as well, a sound pressure level meter, and you'll actually walk through the venue and make sure, see how far off it is in different parts. So you also have that confidence in that measure that you're getting a consistent loudness for everyone in the different areas. So thank you, Jude. Appreciate that. And nice Audio Buff mug too, by the way. Okay, let's, anything else in the chat that we need to take care of right now? Oh, here we go. Thanks, Curtis. We'll try today. Awesome. You got it. There are some free tools as well on the Mac. I just use Audio Hijack. That one is not free. The Julian loudness meter is free, so you can download that one for free, the non-pro version. And it'll have everything you need in it. Okay. All right, so let's go back to the Mac and let me just finish answering the question that we had earlier today. So after I've done my railroading, then I can, well, there are a few ways I can approach this. I can also take care, this is where I'm going to do all my cleanup. So if I need to do denoising, I'm going to apply that to the tracks as well, individual tracks. If I need to cut in any sort of room tone, I'll do that as well. If I need to clean up any mouth clicks, I'll apply those to the tracks as well. So I'll get it all clean and sounding good together. So the two people in this case are talking. Nobody's having to adjust their volume to be able to hear. They can comfortably hear between as they talk back and forth. That's where you want to be. Now, once you've done that, Then what I do, as far as your main question, which was when do I do this loudness normalization? This is when you do it. So you've done all those things. Here's where I would come up here and I would bounce the mix to a new track. So we're going to go ahead and put that on a new track. This is how it works here, at least in DaVinci Resolve. So it's going to go ahead and bounce all of that. It's essentially taking all of the plugins, all the processing you've done, and putting all of that in a new file, essentially capturing the master bus here, putting all of that in a new file and putting it on a separate track here. And that should pop up here when as soon as it's done. It's got about, 17 seconds left. It should drop that onto a new track. And then what I'm going to do is go ahead and mute these other tracks, the original tracks, because we don't want to double them up. So just a few more seconds here. Excuse me, just a second. And there we go. Okay, so now we have this new track with our mix, and you can see it's a stereo mix. So I'm going to mute these original tracks here. We can go ahead and minimize those so they're much smaller. And then this is the one that I would loudness normalize. This is my new mix. Okay, so there are a variety of ways you can do that. Again, here in DaVinci Resolve, you can use this loudness meter that's built in. The only problem is it's not an offline meter. In other words, you have to listen through the entire thing to get a measure of what your integrated loudness is. And that's what you're aiming for here, is to loudness normalize to your integrated loudness target, whatever that is. So if you're going to YouTube, if it's a mostly talking show, I typically target -16 LUFS. If you're going to theater, it's much lower than that. Typically from theater, it's something more like -24 LUFS. If you're going to broadcast, depending on which part of the world you're in, it's going to be -23 or -24 most likely. So those are the things that you would target. Now, how to do that? I personally would bring this back into RX, this new mix that we've bounced, and I would do my processing here. Because the nice thing about this is I can get a loudness on the overall total program integrated loudness without having to listen through the whole thing. Huge benefit. Much faster to work this way. And I can see at a glance what my true peak max is. I'm at -3.6 right now, which is fantastic. I can also see my loudness range, which is 10.9. If I were going again to YouTube, I would probably be aiming to get this closer to 5, certainly 6 or lower. And this, to answer Mark's question, this is when I would pull out a leveler if I needed to. And I would use it in a very mild fashion. I would also use upward compression, which we covered a couple of weeks ago, if I needed to boost the levels without increasing the overall transient, without boosting the transients. So that's another thing you could do here to help master your audio and achieve your loudness target. So that is the kind of high-level approach, my Ford Noel, of how I would do the normalization. The loudness normalization for the overall program, that's the very last thing that you do. It is the last thing that you do. Okay. All right, let's go back to the chat, see what we have going in the chat. Thomas says, clarification, are you railroading because you don't assume a ducking tool? When do you prefer one over the other? Yeah, I'm not using any sort of ducking tool. So typically for production audio, we're not going to be using something like that in the recording process. You could. There are noise gates in, for example, the podcast recorders like the Rodecaster, the Mackie DLZ. Those have those. They can help some. I find that the problem with expander gates, when you have multiple people in the same room, especially if they're close to each other, I find that expanders or gates start to chatter a bit, and that creates more problems than it helps. So I will typically just leave those off and manage it in post. The best thing I've found to help with this whole process is, instead of railroading, using a good auto mix. I usually find that produces better results. Okay. Have you used LMedia Player? I have not.
That's in reference.
I'm looking for a better player. Okay. And VLC is a pretty common one out there. Edwin, hey Curtis, what are your best resources for ear training, and do you do classes for it? Also, happy late Valentine's Day, Danny, and you too, Curtis, in my manly and heterosexual voice. Okay. Thank you, Edwin. I don't have any courses on it. I think one of the best resources is the light and sound, the Learn Light and Sound media sessions, the Sound for Video sessions we do on Sundays. There are some apps out there as well. The session here today. I don't have any names off the top of my head. I've seen them out there before. Those can be really, really helpful as well. They're typically oriented for people that are mixing music, though, is the only downside I've seen. So a lot of the samples they'll play will be music samples, and then they'll, apply some sort of EQ. That's helpful, but it's not dialogue, so it's not exactly the same thing. Another thing, too, is to you can record your own samples, export them, give yourself a few days between. Maybe you'll, at that point, forget what you did on each of the samples and then have it written down somewhere and then just listen to them and try and do your best to guess them. You can kind of create your own little ear training sessions like that. Those are some things. If anyone in the chat has other things, I know we've talked about this before and there are apps out there. If you could share those, that would be amazing. All right. What else have we got in the chat? Chatter in the chat. A little bit of chatter in the chat. Okay, good. Good. Well, I hope, first of all, I'll send this. I don't know if my Ford Noel is here listening to this, but I will send him a link to this video or to this live stream session. Hopefully that'll be helpful for him, and I hope it was helpful for all of you. Audio Buff, again, thanks for sending over those photos. Very helpful to show the right way to do front of house mixing for a convention in a ballroom. You mentioned Mastering Audio, the Art and the Science. Mastering Audio, the Art and the Science. Recommend it? Yeah, it's so first of all, it's a book written by Bob Katz. Bob Katz is sort of a legend in the mastering arena. He masters music, so it's a really good book. It's a little bit on the deeper side. It takes some serious brain processing to understand everything he's talking about, and not all of it is relevant unless you are mixing music as well. And there are several editions. Make sure you get the latest edition. I think the latest edition came out in something like 2015. So some of the plugins that he shows, the software plugins, are a little dated at this point. A lot has happened in plugin development since then. 10 years, essentially, if I remember right, when he did the last edition. But it's going to be one of those books that it's like learning how to mix in Pro Tools by taking a DaVinci Resolve mixing course. So it's one of those kind of experiences. Yeah, there'll be little gems you'll pick up here and there, but you're going to have to work your way through a lot of stuff that isn't necessarily relevant to what you're doing. So if that's what you want, then yes, I recommend it. If you are looking for something that's much more straight ahead and straight to the point of mixing and mastering for film, then it's probably not the right book. But I'll continue to share what I've learned from there too. So don't go too far. Keep coming to the sessions, and we'll definitely cover some of the things that I learned from there. Also, Bob Katz was involved in the process of identifying loudness standards for streaming services and recommendation. He's a member of the Audio Engineering Society and made some of the recommendations that the AES put out were, he was basically the editor for that entire project and the papers that they published. Okay. Thomas Griffin McElroy from My Brother, and Me recommends the free software Levelator. Drag and drop easy, although a bit aggressive. Yes, so Levelator has been around for a long time. I didn't know there was I don't know if there's a newer version of it, but yeah, if you just want to literally drop your audio on it to hit a loudness target, that will do it for you. So it levels, compresses. I don't remember if it does any gating or expanding or noise cleanup or any of that, but it's worth a try. Definitely worth a try if you want to keep things very, very easy. I listen to Matt Ruff, so maybe I can make sense of it. Well, it's a little bit also like buying the Yamaha guide to sound reproduction. I can't remember the exact title for the Yamaha reference manual, but it's a great reference book, I would say. Sort of in that category. Okay, folks, we've come to the end of today's session. Thank you all so much for joining us here. I hope you found something of use here, that maybe you learned something new that you can apply in your work with sound. Get out there, make some great sound, and we'll talk to you again next week. Take care.